Those who have been or currently are in the foster care system, what do you wish people knew? Foster care was fine. It's after you leave it that is hard. Being a new adult with absolutely nobody to guide you. You want to move, you have no help. A crisis comes up, you have nobody to call. Nobody to help you figure out anything about jobs or apartments or bank accounts or insurance. No mom or dad to lend you $20 when your paycheck isn't going to last until next payday. You are sent out on your own. 18 years old, completely alone and no idea how anything works in the world. It's terrifying. Edit, thank you for golds and sorry for not replying to everybody. I've gotten like 200 comments and DMs and RIP inbox. I have a little brother who was adopted from the foster system. Our parents are good people. The most heartbreaking things that I noticed from him in the beginning were a kind of confusion at being treated well by our parents and also confusion at being treated as just one of us, included as a family member. There are some not so good foster homes out there. Family did foster care for 26 years. I was adopted when I was 5. Some are pure and want to help and maybe expand. Some are in it for $sign. I got really lucky and was placed with a decent family that didn't treat me like a second-class citizen. I was family. I've seen horror stories of other places where kids starve or are mistreated in their homes. I had the best possible situation and I won't deny that at all. However, it's still so much to deal with as a small child. Remember when you were a kid and you cried when left at the babysitter's? Imagine going to live at the babysitter's house. My mom wasn't a bad mom. She was a troubled woman trying to get away from an abuser. I was in the home for about half a decade, which is an eternity as a small kid. At 10, half my life had been split between two moms and I wasn't sure what I was allowed to feel. When I finally went back home, would my real mom be upset that I missed my foster mom? Should I talk about missing my old school? The home I stayed at also had upwards of 4 foster kids at a time, who shuffled in and out. A bunch of kids from ages 3-16 who had been through some horrendous stuff. And there I was, a broken kid surrounded by other broken kids. It's a hell of an environment. No matter how good the parents are. My husband and I were set to foster. We had done the classes, home study, everything. However, I was diagnosed with cancer and we were unable to complete. We were then denied when we reapplied when I was in remission. I was able to join an organization that partners with foster teens who are aging out of the system to provide mentoring services. I am an HR and I help with resumes, interview prep, job seeking etc. I am also just an adult who is available to listen. There are ways to support the foster system if you are unable to foster a child. I am so grateful that I am allowed this opportunity. I was in foster care in my teens. My experience may be different than others, but I found that if you aren't small and cute, you are treated as tainted goods. The social worker doesn't really care about you unless you can make the business money, and if you make them good money, they find a way to keep you for as long as possible. They can keep a child until they are 24 quite easily. You are often treated as if you are bad because your parents didn't want you anymore. Upon arriving at a group home, I was instantly stripped of all privileges, including being able to listen to music, and had to earn the smallest of things back over the next 3 months. It felt like I was being punished. There are also no resources for when you leave the system. Foster families are often low income, using you for the extra income given to take care of you without actually using that money on you. They often don't teach you life skills. Education can easily get messed up because you are moved around as soon as you become an inconvenience to the family. Switching between blocks and periods makes it so that your credits don't count in certain instances. When I left foster care, I found out 1.5 years of my schooling wouldn't count, and it took another 3 months for them to transfer my records. The school told me to drop out and get my GED. I went into foster care at 16. My mom had been beating me to the point of breaking bones for years. I have an elementary school pic where I have a black eye from her. I do not know why my mom doesn't like me. She started beating me when I was 4, so I don't think it was me. When I went into high school, it got a lot worse. She started checking my hymen every month or so to make sure that it was still intact. She was obsessed with the idea that I was a slut despite never kissing a boy. I was raped when I was 16 and my mom had my dad drop me off at the youth homeless shelter that I usually stayed at, but this time they refused to pick me up. CPS had known about the abuse for over 9 years and never did anything. My parents are rich and white. My dad is a government official. My mom was so abusive that CPS had asked her to complete a parenting class when I was 13. She got kicked out the first week for bullying the instructor and the other parents. CPS still did nothing literally until they refused to get me. Now that you know my background, know that every foster kid has a tragic story. It might look different, but no matter what the situation that led to being separated is traumatizing. I already had complex PTSD at that point. I didn't act out. I was the type to freeze and fold in on myself. I never hated others, I only hated myself. I was weird, but it was because I had been so neglected. I didn't know how to shower properly or brush my teeth, and I ate with my hands sometimes. I lived in the Schletter for a few months until I was placed 2 hours away in a town I had never been in. My foster mom was deeply religious and heavily involved in her church. In fact, the foster agency that I was placed through had a mandatory religion policy. My first day there I forgot the foster mom's name. I was told to just call her mom instead. It made me feel sick, but if I called her by her first name the family would get mad at me. When I asked if I needed to go to church, I was told that if I didn't I wouldn't work out in the family. Church was really triggering because that is what led to my mom's 6 crusades. I was too afraid to be displaced. Once an older kid is displaced, they often don't get placed again. Displacing also always puts you up to the risk of being abused worse. 60% of the underage sex trafficking industry is fueled directly from foster care. I threw myself into religion. The church taught that God sometimes has to break someone in order for them to finally follow him. I remember laying at the altar sobbing, begging God to forgive me and decide that I had been broken enough. The other foster kids were quickly reunified, so I was alone. The church gave my foster mom an excellent way to abuse us. Her bio kids always came first. Her daughter, who was in the same grade, went to mission trips abroad every break, so all the money my foster mom got through fostering went to that and spoiling her other child. She only got $600 a month for me, so she needed the church to help make sure that she didn't need to spend it on me. Her house was provided by a church member. I had to eat different food that was donated through church. There was one church member who donated a Costco-sized bag of tortilla chips, and they were all stale, so I would have to microwave them and then just eat that every day until that bag was gone. All my clothing was donated through the church. I didn't get new shoes or undergarments for over half a year. The entire year and a half that I lived with her, she only gave me $50 for clothing, and that's when I got shoes and underwear. I didn't get a backpack or a nice shirt. When my foster mom decided she didn't want to work anymore, she told the church that she needed to quit her job to take care of me, because after all, foster kids are a handful. The church members started paying her to clean their houses instead. I started being starved. My foster mom would only feed me if someone else besides her and her youngest daughter were home. Her older bio daughter stopped coming home around that time, so I wasn't able to eat outside of lunch, even on the weekend. Her daughter used to just be passive, but she actively started taunting me around this time. I was treated as an idiot. It was just assumed that I was the dumb one and her bio daughter was the smart, lovely Christian girl. I never said anything because I wasn't sure if it was abuse or not. On the outside everything looked great. My foster mom was an enthusiastic church member, heavily involved in the community. She had to quit her job to take care of the foster kid who is acting so bad that she needed to be there 24/7. Her daughter, that was my age, was well behaved, went on mission trips regularly and never had sex. I also fit the part. I was failing my classes. I ate with my hands and I was missing a lot of everyday knowledge because I had never been taught. I had been arrested for shoplifting underwear and food. The underwear was a thong, so I was seen as the ultimate charity project. Finally, one day, after starving me for over 3 months, she picked me up from school and told me that God had let her see where my mom was coming from, and that's why she had been starving me. She dropped me off at therapy and I told my therapist that part, and I was removed a few days later. The home that I was placed in afterwards was a social worker's house. She had just completed her master's and was actually volunteering at the shelter that I had originally lived in. Her husband was a retired Marine. Their house was the same exact story. CPS attracts people who need to feel control. Whether that be sexual predators, abusers or neglectors. The people who would speak up against this injustice happen to be children. Very few of those who make it through choose to openly talk about it in public. On the surface the kids look terrible and that's all that society sees. They don't see the real reasons why the kids are behaving poorly. They rarely look at the foster parent. It's not as bad as people might think. But I also consider myself very lucky because I know it could have been worse. I was taken away and placed with a foster family immediately, when I was 2. They later adopted me when I was 5. My earliest memories? They were just like you would expect with any other family. They made absolutely sure that we weren't treated like anything other than family. Things were a lot harder for them than it was for me, as they fostered other children. Children they didn't think should go back to their families, but there was nothing they could do. One of their biggest regrets was not being able to adopt my brother as well. Since the courts ruled in the favor of his father, half-siblings. They taught me that just because someone is related to you doesn't make you family. Those that treat you like family are family. That we are human beings too, and large black trash bags are not luggage. I wish people knew that we had to learn certain coping mechanisms that create barriers we had to in order to survive. We need people in our lives willing to help us remove the barriers. To know that all we want is to feel safe, to feel loved. We know it's fucking hard to do. We need you. Old man here. I aged out of foster care in the 90s after 11 years in care. No one knows what you have been through that got you into foster care. It's insane to me that so much of a child's history is completely unknown to DCS CPS workers and thus the foster parents. Not to mention that children in care aren't treated as the most trustworthy children, and so we are rarely trusted when we report abuse or unhealthy conditions in the homes. I work with a lot of DCS probation and social workers now, and sadly not much has changed. The thing is, the information is there to be had and it would help every child in care, but people don't read it to know it's important enough to pass along to the caregivers. I found out at 30 that not a single one of my foster parents knew about any of the abuse that happened to me to get me into custody, nor did they know why I had moved from one foster home to the next so often. Spoiler alert, it was sexual abuse, and it took me 30 years to get over believing it was all my fault and that I wasn't a monster magnet. Yes, my life was terrifying with my biological family and I was abused daily, but it was the horrific sexual abuse in foster care, and no one that could have helped me, believe me, that tucked me up the most. I haven't been in foster care, but I talked to someone from my hometown who was her whole life. She told me that she was dumped on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. There was barely any food to eat and all of it was rotten. The children didn't even have blankets. They were infested with various kinds of bugs. Children ages 2 to 10 had upraised bumps and bleeding scabs from the infestation. Children were beat regularly and routinely forced to clean all day. The living conditions were filth with a lack of any compassion from the foster home parents. It was like a really twisted orphanage. Sexual abuse and chaos was a regular part of life. She was traumatized from the system. The investigators that audited the place knew but did nothing. They were paid off is what she had told me. I'm wondering if this is the same ranch that was recently discovered for a sex trafficking ring. The owner is likely facing serious charges. For all the pro-birth people who insist on foster care, I want you to think about this. I've heard horror stories about local foster housing in my town too. I was a foster parent for 11 years, all teen girls. Most of my kids still call me dad. And I haven't been one since 2010. I hope I did things right. We're just as confused and frustrated by the system as our kids. I wouldn't trade my time as a foster parent for anything. Don't try to act overly motherly or fatherly. This means something totally different to some of us. Sometimes the people who bore us aren't fit to raise us, and that can really screw with integrating into society. Calling God our Father is a scary thing. Saying you're going to mother me brings on a fear response. Take your time with wounded animals and wounded children. I'm in foster care because my mother left me early this year, but I've been given the choice to stay with my uncle, so my experience isn't that bad, but I will say sometimes you feel like you're all alone and that you have lost everything, so the slightest affection or compliment can brighten my day sometimes. Gay parents are way better than no parents. Foster care and being in the system doesn't mean you live in a foster home. At 8 I was taken away from my parents who were drug addicts. I've lived with my grandparents since. And legally, I will always be considered a foster child and in custody of the state. I'm not in a foster home. And never have been in one. These kids get ducked over and flat ass stolen from. I was in foster and group homes. I'd just like to point out that grandparents raising grandchildren are not foster parents and do not receive a stipend. We're busy trying to figure out how to pay for both mouth braces and hip surgery at the same time. That amongst these heroes thrive a population of some of the worst predators I have ever encountered. That CPS is a crock of bullet without pity and without remorse. They don't protect. They facilitate and systemize the abuse. I was orphaned at 7 and I was stolen from my loving caring grandparents because it was profitable for these people to do so. If any people are interested in foster care and would like to talk about it with a foster parent, feel free to comment or PM me. It is life changing if you go in with the right intentions.